States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world.
Hire people. We're back with former Bush speechwriter Michael Gerson. His new book is called Heroic Conservatives. So, Michael, you made the transition to columnist in the Washington Post.
Yeah, twice a week.
It's so impressive. If you got to keep up with people like George Will, who are brilliant.
Which is impossible, but I try.
Okay, I'm reading down. Let me ask you about your book, because I want to get back to this administration, because you are like, this is Abu Ghraib for me.
Yeah.
This is a chance to get one of you guys inside the room here. Tell me what conservatism ought to be doing in the years ahead after Bush.
Well, I make an argument. I tell stories in the book, but I also make an argument about the future of the party, that you can be pro-free market, and I am, and also be for helping kids in Africa, that you can be socially conservative, which I am, and also believe that you have to have an approach for the poor and addicts and children at risk. I think there's a backlash against those ideals in the Republican Party right now if you listen to the debates, and I want to make that argument in the Republican context.
And how's it selling?
Well, we'll see. I mean, you see a little bit of this on the international side.
Did you come up with the phrase compassionate conservatism? Who came
I didn't
up with
come
that?
up with it, but I was very involved on Capitol Hill and starting to put together some ideas that went into that movement, trying to find ways for government to encourage faith-based and community institutions to help people, to use conservative and free market ideas to help individuals.
What kind of an influence is Dick Cheney on this whole thing of trying to be compassionate? Would you call him a compassionate conservative?
I don't think that's necessarily the tradition of the Republican Party that he comes from, and his staff was often conventionally conservative in the White House.
Hard ass.
But the Republican Party is a coalition.
Let me ask you about I think I've been reading the book. I think it represents a different side of the moon from where I think, but I think it's well written and very smart. I think you've got to make the case for this new protein evolution of your party, of the conservative side. By the way, you come from the Bob Casey sort of culturally conservative Democrats as well. You've worked with them, right?
Well, actually, I had a lot of respect for Bob Casey, governor, and the first president I liked was Jimmy Carter. He was my kind of my hero.
You're like Hillary, coming from Barry Goldwater girl to.
Yeah, but I'm pro-life. I believe in conservative economics. But I think there has to be this additional moral element that often in American history has been rooted in religion, and not just conservative Protestant.
Do you think let me ask you this. What do you make of this? You were pretty tough on Democrats here. You said that at the time of the 2006 State of the Union address, a group of Democratic and liberal activists organized a viewing party to react to the speech. This is in your new book. Every time President Bush used the words freedom or terror or weapons of mass destruction, the organizers would ring a bell and the crowd would laugh. In portions of the Democratic Party, just a few years after 9/11, terrorism is a source of humor, derided as a Republican myth, and the word freedom has become a laugh line.
Right.
Well, what do you mean? Is this for real? Was there really such a party?
It was. It was.
Who was there?
It reported the New Republic, but it was the MoveOn.org portion of the party.
And those are Democrats?
Yeah.
Or are they lefties that are somewhat, in the blogosphere?
I think that they have a large influence in the Democratic Party right now. I have great respect for the Democratic Party of Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman and John Kennedy, people that were confident about the promotion of American values abroad, took our security seriously. I like Senator Lieberman, who represents a lot of these ideals within the Democratic Party.
But see, I think you're wrong. I think you're mistaken, because words like democracy, I was there when the South African government, the white government, finally gave to and allowed the majority of the people to vote, white and black and mixed race. And I believe completely in democracy. And I believe I was there at the Berlin Wall when it came down. I believe completely in freedom. Right. And those things, and yet I don't subscribe to a lot of this stuff. Let me ask you about these phrases.
Okay, sure.
Where did the word regime change come from? Because to me, it's a coded word for aggression. You've decided you're going to bring down a foreign government with a military force and occupy a country, take it over. But you come up with this new term of art, regime change. Where did it come from?
Actually, I'm not sure. It was a pre-existing word. We didn't invent it.
But it's a phrase used for justification of war.
Well, sometimes you can have regime change through democratic means, too. I mean, it means that you're getting rid of an authoritarian or totalitarian government. That can happen in a variety of ways. In Afghanistan, it took place because of military force. There was regime change in South Africa because of a democratic revolution. But I'll tell you,
regime change to me has been used by this administration as propaganda to push a war. They use the term like weapons of mass destruction to conflate together biological, chemical, and most importantly, nuclear weaponry. They use terms, people use terms today like Islamo-fascist to combine Al-Qaeda with the Ba'athist regime, the secular Ba'athist regime of of Saddam Hussein that may just want us the hell out of their country. They confuse, they conflate a lot of things. They conflate what happened to us on 9/11 with our problem with the regional threat of Iraq. Right. Language is being used in a way that justifies fear and war. That's what bothers me.
Right. Well, to one extent, fear is justified in a world where there are people out to kill us.
Then why do we have to cook up new phrases then?
Well, I don't think that it necessarily was a new phrase.
Weapons of mass destruction, find it in the encyclopedia 5-10 years ago. It's a new phrase, weapons of mass destruction, as is homeland to describe our country, right. As is regime change, as is Islamofascist, the new phrase of art. Why do we have to come up with this new language all the time?
These phrases refer to real threats in the world that we saw arrive in our country from the other side of the earth. Because they weren't confronted early, because there wasn't a proactive American policy in these areas.
In what way would changing the government in Iraq, had we done it before 9/11, prevented 9/11?
Certainly, I was talking about Afghanistan.
Okay, what would getting rid of Saddam Hussein have saved us from 9/11?
Well, given what we
understand, you say fight them there rather than here, and there's absolutely, in this case, no connection.
I think
and yet the administration has been...
The president's been very, very clear that he did not tie Iraq to 9/11.
Do you know how many people believe that because of what the administration has said over the years? They believe that there is a... Because the way the president speaks, no, he's not stupid. He doesn't say Iraq attacked us. But the notion of payback, of we got to get them there before they get them here, to get us here, has been used over and over again. Language has been used to justify war.
It's a fairly simple point that 9/11 alerted us that we can be the victims of trends and problems and ideological movements on the other side of the world. And in an age of weapons of mass destruction, that's a serious threat that every Republican, every Democrat's going to face for the next 50 years. We better take it seriously.
And we better deal with it clearly.
I think so, but you know what? Not just with military force, also by promoting human rights, women's rights, rule of law, hope against disease, all these kind of tools of American society.
Except that I think you unite this country when you deal in facts and truth, and you don't use clever language to conflate one issue with another, when you're very successful at building fear. I think the actual threat to us is real enough. We don't need to have better language or new language to explain the threat to us. That's where I would disagree. I think there was a march to war against Iraq, which was a mistake, and had nothing to do with reducing the threat to this country from a real threat, which is what we allowed to escape from us at Tora Bora in Afghanistan. Had we kept the focus on the true enemy in Tora Bora, I'm going with Peter Bergen here, an expert in the New Republic this week. Had we stayed with that, had we traced the real threat back to Afghanistan, which we did, and stayed with that threat, we wouldn't face now the hell we look at now in Pakistan. We wouldn't have al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia. The threats we face now are, to some extent, the result of our own mistakes of omission. And the reason we committed those mistakes of omission, we were committing this act against Iraq, which put the American army in the middle of Arabia, surrounded by its hostile enemy. Right. Well, that's a problem. Well, but that's my book, not yours.
Right, exactly.
Anyway, your book is called Heroic Conservatism. It has nothing to do with our argument here, by the way. It's a great book to read what's going on in that part of the party, his compassionate conservative wing of the party, not to be confused with Dick Cheney's part of the party, which has a different view. Compassionate, Dick Cheney, interesting. Anyway, so what else is new? We've got some results from the NBC focus group coming up, and it's about who people favor when they're putting with this Frank Luntz focus group. It turns out that Fred Thompson seems to have a lot of general appeal as a fallback for a lot of people who've looked over Rudy Giuliani and are looking over Mitt Romney. It's fascinating. Fred Thompson, he's going to be on Meet the Press this Sunday. Tim's got the big one. He sits down with Tim Russert, and Tim is always tough. You're watching Hardball, only on MSNBC.